Hi everyone, my name is Alankar Kyle. You guys have seen me before. I am one of the UX track leads. Welcome to day 2. After lunch, everyone is full of food, sleeping. Hopefully we'll wake you up a little bit. We are asking for participation. This is more of a discussion than anything else. So right now, I have said that we are bringing you superstars, and I really believe that we are going to bring you some superstars right now. So I would ask our superstar panel, and first tell us what your superpower is, and then introduce yourself. Laura?
Superpowers. I don't know about that one. We'll have to get back to that. But,
Oh,
my name's Lauren Langley, and I work at CSE, which is Career Sports and Entertainment. It's a digital agency in Cobb County, and I'm pretty new to that company. About 2 months in, and prior to that, I was at Turner for about 4 years, interaction design, and right now I'm a UX lead. So my background is actually in graphic design, and then like the days of print. And then when print died, I kind of adapted and did some like web design. Freelance for a while, went to grad school at Georgia Tech, and kind of, found the UX life after that. And so I do everything from prototyping and HTML, CSS front-end development, wireframing, and getting into a little bit more research in my new role as well. So thank you.
Hi, I'm Diane DeSetta, and I am the manager of usability at Mannheim. Probably a company you've never heard of before. It's a Cox Automotive company, and we are the world's largest wholesale car auction company. We sell over 1 billion cars a month worldwide. My role at Mannheim is to manage all qualitative and quantitative customer testing. So we do things like Opinion Lab, Optimizely A/B testing. We do all formal lab testing. So I have a strong research background, as you can tell. We also do asynchronous testing using lots of automated tools so that we don't have to be in front of our customers, and of course, web moderated and all that good stuff. Prior to being at Mannheim, I was actually an independent consultant for 15 years, working as a UX strategist. And I made the move to Mannheim because I was interested in seeing what it was like to see a project go from not just deployment, but beyond. And it's been a lot of fun. So if you have any questions about the transition, feel free at the end.
Hi, I'm David DeMumbrum. I've been practicing UX for about 12 years. I've done a lot of work for a lot of different companies. Most recently, I'm working on a website for a very small business. Before that, I worked over the summer earlier for a startup that is really like 2 or 3 people and self-funded. So it'll be interesting to see where it goes with that. Before that, I worked at a couple of agencies, and then last year I was at Turner. So I've worked all over the place. Most of my employment's been with Turner on and off through the past 12 years, but I've also worked at AutoTrader. So what I do is right now, a lot of analytical stuff and BA work. It's really more on the sort of analysis side at this point. I'm kind of a data technical person, but I'm not a programmer. In the past, I've been more of like a wireframe jockey and done some usability testing, really love user research whenever I can get to do it. So I'm all for what Diane's doing. So hope I can lend some valuable insights.
And you guys know me, my name is Alankar Kyle. My superpower is to make food disappear. And pad the front porch a little bit with the food, and the food disappears. Enough about me. The title of this panel is Danger of Falling in Love with One Technique. And we all fall in love with something and then we say, this is it. So these experts will obviously talk about how not to do that and how different techniques can be used. So Agile is a word that is now coming up again and again. Now, as most of you have been in the UX for a long time, all 3 of you, and you know that the techniques that we came up with in UX came up with in 1980s or earlier, when it was product based and not digital. But the danger of Agile, many of the techniques, is also that popcorn testing is done, right? Something that basically for the sake of testing, you do some testing and that really doesn't give you any value. So in your experience, how have you adopted Agile in your approach, day-to-day approach, making sure that you are actually getting the key findings without having any popcorn testing going on? Wow.
In my experience, we have broken up, thought of using different techniques in the Agile process. For instance, like breaking up wireframes into batches, perhaps, like starting out with a navigation and homepage in like one sprint, and then moving on to the landing pages, things like that. And further sprints, and while you're doing that, the designers are coming back with feedback too. So I think that's kind of a good way to include the UX in the process along the way. Also, we've been implementing some user testing along the way as well. So if, just short tests with small pools of participants, just to test out a certain feature, like navigation on a mobile device, and just kind of test that out, and then make adjustments along the way too. That's kind of another way to work in the Agile atmosphere.
What is popcorn user testing? Because I didn't get a chance to ask that.
I
Okay,
can
go
give
for
you
it.
an example of
Awesome.
that.
Yeah,
I can
go
totally
ahead.
give you an example of that one. So popcorn testing, for those of you who've never done it, is when you go out about 24 to 48 hours before a group of customers and show them a prototype, and you get about 15 to 20 minutes of their time. So it's very iterative, it's very strike. I call them strike because I feel like they're like military ambushes on our customers. We'll go in the wild, like where they are doing business, and be like, hey, have you got 15 minutes? Can you talk to me for 15 minutes? Can you take a look at this? We usually go out, I just conducted one of these last week in response to the Agile team that wanted there was some tension between the product manager and the Agile team about deployment of text messaging. And so we needed to get out very quickly in front of that decision, whatever decision they were making, and basically validate it, which is what we use popcorn testing for a lot of the time at Mannheim, is to just validate something that has come up last minute that may be going out in a sprint 3 weeks from today. I don't recommend it for concept testing. It's very difficult to get really good results with concept testing, especially since you're out in the wild and your customers are typically in the middle of doing their business. For us, at an auction, we're talking about people that are running around, going into the lanes and doing their stuff. It's very active. There's a lot of sensory stuff happening. There's lots of inputs coming in particular with our business. And it's hard to keep their attention because they're focused on making money. So popcorn testing is good if you need to do something out of desperation.
So it sounds like guerrilla usability testing.
It is, with much less planning than
Okay.
guerrilla testing.
Yeah. See, I'll shake things up maybe a little bit and say you can't really do effective user testing that's organized and planned well in advance in Agile. I mean, I don't think you can, because you have this huge backlog of things, and you don't know what's going to be taken up in a sprint, right? I mean, there's 1,000 items, and depending on the level of difficulty and what the product managers are wanting that week, you may have to put in the sprint different things. So you can't test all those in advance, I don't think.
Are you talking about testing things inside the sprint backlog, or are you talking about testing things for new products?
The former. So when you're on an Agile team, all I've ever been able to do when I've been the UX designer on an Agile team is do popcorn testing, and hopefully, guerrilla testing. I mean, not with a group of people, but usually go around to different people working on a particular task and say, what are you doing? How are you doing this? And then try not to get in their way, take notes, go back, and then hopefully I have a sprint in advance to work it all out. But that's never very well planned. It's always impromptu, and I don't think ideal. But in Agile, if I've been the only one on a team, it's not really. I mean, sometimes there is no other option.
Right. So you haven't worked frequently with a research team.
Well, I mean,
That has the ability to do that,
we
yeah.
did for years, but it was more of a waterfall environment.
Right.
Diane and I worked at Auto Trader for a
Yes.
time together, and they had a very organized. They're a Cox company too, and they have a very organized. Well, I don't know anymore if they do. But
Well, I don't know about Auto Trader, but Mannheim is very
Right.
organized. We are very, very organized. So popcorn testing is one of the techniques we use, okay, for agile responses.
Why don't you share some other techniques that you guys are
I mean,
using?
that's just one thing, and I defined popcorn, right, so that everybody in the room could know what it is. But there's lots of other ways to get research fit into an agile environment, and we are very agile. We have Kanban running, for those of you that know what that is. We have got a ton of teams. We have 22 separate teams running at Mannheim for Agile development because we're a very large company and we're addressing a lot of different things. So we have different levels of testing that happen at different times. So we have popcorn that's happening during sprints or between sprints. One of the advantages of popcorn is that if you get a researcher out to do it, we typically, because we come with some street cred for what we do, we typically have some influence over moving the sprint timeline. So we could gain a week or two, which in Agile is pretty big, and potentially they will rework something prior to having to go through the process of, going back through sprint planning and all that good stuff. So that's one of the ways we use it from a design perspective to get things in. But we also have sprint zero that we do, and that's usually at a conceptual level. So before things are planned out, large chunks are designed prior to that, and we will do either formal lab testing with that, depending on how high profile that project is. We'll do formal lab testing to get clips and have montages done. But we also do asynchronous testing, remote testing that we'll do on the fly. So we can do within a 3.5-week period, we can recruit our customers, test them, and have some kind of trend summary, right? And mostly analyze stuff out within a 3.5-week period. So we can do that thing about a month in advance. So that's another technique that we use to get in.
What do your devs do when you're in Sprint Zero?
The devs are not engaged with us in Sprint Zero. They're only engaged as consultants. So we bring them in to basically talk through when we're through detailed design, sort of during the end of design, and get them in the discussion. That's when they come in.
So
but I'm outside the design process, so I do have to admit that as a researcher, I have insight, but only from the peripheral.
So have you guys ever used 5-second tests or first click tests? And if you did you find them useful? Because those are some of the agile techniques that I've used.
No.
Quick to do. You have not?
Oh,
5-second
talk about
test
it.
is really kind of lame. That's the one where you build up credit by taking tests and then you have other people take tests. I found that most of the people on there were designer. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
Where most of the people on there were I suspect they were other designers. The feedback I got was very terse. I knew nothing about the people taking the test. Now maybe it's improved. This was back in.
So we actually, I have done that at our local conference, my company's conference. Obviously, it's important to recruit the right people. The way is to do the 5-second test. And again, if you're a UX purist, it's not going to be something that you're gonna love. But it's literally that I show you something for 5 seconds and I take it away, then I ask you your opinion about that.
Yeah.
What that allows you to do is actually for me to discover what is top of mind for you. You as human beings will be looking for things that are important to you. Mm-hmm. And that allows me to bridge the gap between what top of mind for me as a business and what is top of mind for you as I see you. What is top of mind for you as a user. And that becomes the critical thing, right? Is that, go ahead, Clint.
So do you set context before showing them? Because obviously it depends on who the user is, right? And if your target user is not represented by whoever this recruit is, you need to set context for the recruit to say, hey, you're shopping for a car, or you're trying to post to Twitter,
Yes.
or whatever.
There's no recruiter. There's no recruiter with 5-second tests.
No,
Right. So-
when you get whoever the person is,
Sure.
you set the context in 5 seconds and then show them the thing. I guess that's a 10-second test.
I don't think you can do it. It was really limited. Can you do that?
You can. So, for example, you can use have you guys ever used a tool called UserTestingcom?
Yes.
Oh, good.
Well, I've read a lot about it.
Right.
I've never
So
used it
it's,
personally. Yeah.
So DAS actually is one of the game changers that is out there, in my opinion, frankly. And my community does a lot of lab testing, and we are now transitioning into UserTesting.com. Why? Because to the point that you guys made, in a sprint, you have to be very discreet. You can't be testing everything.
No.
So you can't just say, oh, I'm going to test 24/7, every single thing that's going to be there. I'm going to just test 2 things, and that's what I'm focused on. And the UserTesting.com or Loop 11 is another tool. You basically can recruit people on their panel who agree to do a test for you. And with the UserTesting.com, I've gotten results within less than a week.
So you're using this for B2C customers mainly, right?
It's for B2C and B2B both.
Because we're kind of in a unique business. What we do, we work with car salesmen. I mean, anyone who has a lot who sells used cars, right? Or new cars are our customers. And the problem with the 5-second test for us is typically getting a panel of people because they need to be very specific. Right. And the way we test at Mannheim, we do, I think we're very lucky because we have good marketing segments. We have really good support from market research to provide those segments. So when we're testing something, we know exactly who this is targeting already, and we need to recruit for that segment. So, the 5-second tests are not really valuable for us, but that's probably the nature of our participants, our consumers.
I have a question. We talked about Agile and how that all integrates, but the difficulty that I see in Agile is the blending of the strategic testing with the task level testing. How do you get those two to match together?
That's a great question.
Double focus between dev and product. So
Yeah, so I mean, within an Agile structure, I found it was effective to do more subjective sort of user observation and interviews, just asking about pain points and watching people actually do work and taking notes, and then go back and write stories based on that, and then kind of point them out within the sprint planning based on perceived level of severity and politics and all the rest of the stuff that goes on in sprint planning. And then hopefully I had a sprint to do a prototype or something, take it to them, see what they thought, and then it would go ahead and be developed. So the stories would be taken up. But again, it's very one incremental stuff. It wasn't well planned. It was very improvisational. Couple of people, hey, do you have some time? That kind of thing.
Yeah, so at my company we have used UserTesting.com, and it's been great for us, and I think it fits within Agile if we need it to. Where like I mentioned, just testing out certain things like the navigation on mobile. That's something you can just have more task based, and the results you get back are like immediate. I think we did a test for like 8 people or 16 people, and it was like within a couple hours, the people had already taken the test, and you can see them actually using the product. And I think it's a good way to like the task-based way of writing up your test is, I think, really. It makes you focus on kind of what your objectives are and what you really are testing for, because with UserTesting.com, you're paying these people and for like a 15-minute segment, and so you have to like be very descriptive and what you want the outcome to be. So you can have think about conversion rates, like how many people are going to click a certain button, or how length of time it takes them to complete a task. As well as you can ask them questions like overall, like how do you feel about our brand, and certain things like that. So you get all of that, and you also get like just the video clips you can send to your client, which has been great as well. And then just also filtering for the users. You can get super specific about who's in that pool.
So Clement, to answer your question, I love your question, because you're right. In all of this testing that you're going to do Agile, right, then the strategic is lost. From that perspective, how many of you have done buyer's journey, or because in my opinion, that is one way of getting there, right? And if you have done it, I want to tie that up to a second point that I know a couple of you have worked on for yourself. What recommendation would you have for a one person shop?
Always be delivering value.
So,
I don't have anything to add to that.
I
I have nothing to add to
Sing
that.
for your supper.
I have nothing to add to that. Yeah, be aware that you will eat, you eat what you kill. Yes, you eat what you kill. So be aware of that. Is the question more around like how do you fit in the analysis and testing?
It's a two-part question. One is
Okay.
obviously I would like you to address buyer's journey. How do
Okay.
you do that? But at the same time, I also want you to address the fact that all the things that we've talked about up to now, Agile and buyer's journey. If you are a one-person shop or if you're a startup, how do you do this? You don't have access to all this.
Ooh, that's a very deep question, Alankar. Okay.
So take up the buyer's journey first, and then we can come to the second part of it.
Well, we don't do buyer journeys at Mannheim. We do customer touch point diagrams.
Sure.
There's a big difference between a buyer journey and a customer touch point program. The reason we do customer touch points is because we feel that at any moment we have the ability to help customers make decisions on buying or making a purchase. We are not selling them a specific thing.
Right.
We are selling them tools and services and advice on how to make that purchase. We know they want a car. We're not exactly sure all the time what they want, but we know that they want one. So our tools and services and our business is surrounded around that. So we do customer touch point.
So you worked for yourself for years and years,
Yes, I'm
right?
getting to that.
Oh,
yeah.
sorry.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. Yeah, so that's the buyer journey piece. When I was a consultant, when I was working for myself for 15 years, wow, there's a lot of techniques you use to immerse yourself in the business, because when you are contracted out to a company that you may or may not have industry experience with, you need to quickly immerse yourself in that business and be almost an expert in that business at that point, or relatively quickly before you can start doing real valuable design, right? Because you need to understand what that business is, what their motivation is, not just on a project basis, but as a business as a whole. And so there's lots of different ways to do that. Typically, when I was a consultant, I would ask for artifacts from the company and say, I need your marketing segments for who your customers are. If you have personas, please give those to me. If you don't, do you have any market research? So I always started with research. I started with marketing because they always are closest to the customer in terms of personality as well as behavior. And I asked them for quantitative logs. Like if they were running Opinion Lab, I'd ask for logs of that. If they were running Optimizer or any A/B testing software, I would ask for that as well. I'd ask for like a 6-month swatch so that I could see. Because quantitative metrics and qualitative metrics work together. So you can get a good story about the business from that.
Right.
That's kind of how I attacked it.
Yeah, I mean, what I've found every time I've worked for myself and brought up user research, the client's like, yeah, that'd be really great, but we don't have time for that. So anyway, about those wireframes, can you make them look more like comps? Because my investors or my client, my associates can't really look at wireframes, but they're good at looking. So they want to jump right into visual. So I've had to do it all, just totally informally by asking family, like going to the work sites, just in any way I can, digging through stuff, and really almost like not hiding it from the client, not really talking about it, because what I found is they don't want to pay for it. They want results.
Yeah. No, clients, when you're an independent, like most clients, unless they're paying you to do research, do not want to pay for research. And so the dirty secret, which most of you in this room, if you're UXers already know, is that you have to slip research in, right? Into the process and disguise it, right? You have to disguise it in some other deliverable, but that it's required. That's why I was saying, to your point, David, to your point, it's the dirty secret.
How to be a spy,
right?
101.
How to be, yeah, you didn't know that's what you were going to learn today, but that's what you're going to, no. So like I was saying earlier, I think that ask for qualitative research that has been done prior and quantitative metrics that are within a time frame really makes sense in order putting that story together. That is kind of you getting to know their customer. So you can also ask to go out to a site, which I've done several times. I mean, when I was a consultant, I worked at CNN, and I sat on the floor, on the broadcasting floor with the editors and assistant editors, and sat there for like a half a day.
I'll stop you right there.
Go.
Don't ask.
Yes, do.
Well, at a place like CNN, you need permission.
It's easier to get forgiveness and permission.
Yes,
It is. I've heard this for many years.
that's true.
It's a great point.
But
Agreed.
Hold on.
They get shot later. It's worse.
does that work best when you are employed by the company? Or but if you versus if you are a contractor, then you're like, well, you can ask forgiveness, but I'm not paying you for that.
Well,
You have to have the staff to do it.
Okay.
Well, don't do anything illegal. That's the first thing I'd say. But second of all, do everything you can to get to the customer. Listen, if you know that you're working for like a Home Depot, you can go stand outside a Home Depot
Right,
and interview
right.
people that are walking in.
Yeah,
You
Home
can say
Depot,
you work
right.
for the company. Of course, that is a little risky because, that we're talking about a large company. But, get creative.
Say you work for Lowe's.
Be brave.
Lauren?
Oh,
So so you said you like ask for all that information kind of upfront from the client, but what if they don't have that available? What have you done?
So if they don't have it available, then I do the next level of research. And David, you can either confirm or deny that you do this. I typically reach out to my trusted network of UXers and ask them if they've ever worked on a similar project and problem space and get their advice. So if you don't already have a trusted network, get one quickly because they are your biggest asset. As in any business.
You can take it to IXDA and ask
you-
any of us.
You can take it to IXDA. Good one. Very good point. Good plug for IXDA. Nicely done, David. I run a UX mentors group, so you can always come to us. But I think it's important to rely on your professional, fundamental knowledge base and validate that with other professionals. So if you have no research and you're working on a problem you've never worked on before, go get help. Go get help from the professional community. We are here for you. Do it.
So I'm not in the research space a lot, but in other UX roles, I've kind of had to either cut the research part or rely on others. But I've found econsultancy.com has been a good resource because I'm not familiar with that space, but as like a one-person team that might be helpful because there's a lot of analytics and a lot of marketing-based stuff, but they do have a lot of articles for user experience too.
Marketing
So.
Sharpa, another one.
Sherpa.
Which test one, another one. Clement?
I was going to suggest also go to the business resources and look at Forrester and Gartner and all of those if you have
Yes.
someone that has a login and you can get some of the reports. Underpinning your questions with outside research is usually a method of underscoring their inability to give you facts.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I've had good.
But on that question though, there's obviously multitudes of pieces and parts on how to go about this, but has any of you guys ever used the Salesforce as a way to get to data?
Oh, you mean like the actual sales people at a company? Oh, heck yeah. And our CRM system at Mannheim is unbelievable. CRMs are a plethora of information for you to understand your customers' behavior, customer care records. You name it. That was a good point. Thank you for reminding.
What is CRM? Just to remind everybody, and I can't remember what it is
Oh,
either.
they're customer relationship management systems. So Salesforce is one of them. I can't.
Sales logics from Sage.
Oracle is another one.
Oracle.
We have an Oracle person in the room.
To your point, actually we did that. When you cannot, in the first phase of buyer's journey, what we did was we brought in the salespeople and we did role play. Because they're on the phone whole day, we just asked, hey, can you play the role of this customer X? And then let's walk through what you experienced, what are you looking for? What's your input? That is, what are your perceptions or your assumptions when you come to the website? I'm mostly from website.
Yeah.
But, and then what are the outputs you're expecting once you're done with using the website? That is what information you're looking for. How are you looking for that? And the second comment I would make to that is, if you ever do this, first and foremost, please do it. Clement is right. This is in the Agile environment. You have to do this. And if it is that you do it on your own, or if you do, talking to internal folks and having them play a role. But the second thing is, do recognize that it does not end. It's a constantly optimizing the actual journey, whether it's a buyer's journey, whether it's a touch journey. And you have to continuously do that. So I want to, I'm sorry, you wanted to add something?
Yeah. What I've found every time I've worked independently for like a startup or a company is, well, almost every time, I guess, as the pictures of the users become clearer when I'm starting in a new problem space, and I've collected all the information and done as much research as I've been able to, what I've found is like putting together a user story, and that's not like in Agile, but I'm talking about like a narrative of how the user might proceed to go through the different steps of using the product or service. People can usually receive that and digest it more easily than like a report of some kind of, usability test or something like that. So that's been effective too.
I like that one. I know.
Agreed.
I think that the journey is just a visual approach to that, right? So moving on to in this particular conference, you guys have heard about wearables. You have heard about Internet of Things. Up to now, the UX that we have talked about, whether it's agile or not, is for the static world. One screen and maybe a couple of screens. As we go into the Internet of Things, the wearables, the geo-targeting, where there is potentially no screen, what techniques can we be thinking about using, looking in your futuristic class?
So field observations, we're actually experiencing that right now. We're kind of going through a transition as a business because auctions are physical locations that could be 5 miles in diameter because cars are parked on the lot and dealers want to see the cars and get inside them and test drive them. We have a lot of complexity and logistics operationally that work supposedly seamlessly with our internet technologies and our support tools for that purchasing behavior. So one of the ways in which we are doing a lot of tracking is we are embedding lots of customer satisfaction feedback modes on devices like mobile devices. We have kiosks in our locations. So we're trying to collect a lot of data passively, where we allow customers to come to us when they want to share with us. So that's one way that we're collecting data. I think the other way that we're collecting it is by actually actively sending out explicitly surveys for customer satisfaction, specifically about changes we've made at the auction, changes we've made on the website. So we have Opinion Lab running on all of our web properties, including all of our mobile and responsive stuff. And then we also have the kiosks in-house. We have staff that take in that information. And then we are also running all of the we don't have geolocators yet, but we're kind of toying with iBeacons and geolocating them when they're on the lot so they can find things a little bit easier. But we're also doing like time motion studies, which is very traditional, but actually in the realm of wearables and with the Internet of Things, I think time motion study is going to come back again. It's kind of making a comeback because it's a really good, cool way to get interesting feedback about how long something's taking.
What is a time motion study? I haven't used that.
So time motion studies are when you observe people in the wild in their environment and you're literally timing them. You can sometimes use internet applications to do these time motion studies, but you're also observing their movement through the space from A to B. So for example, for someone on our lot who's picking up a car, a transporter who's going to take a car, we will start the clock on his time motion study the moment that he enters the lot. We'll time how long it takes him to get to the car, but we're also seeing how many mistakes does he have to make along the way to find it. Is the car parked in the right place? And if not, how much longer does it take him to do that? So it's not just the time, but it's also their environment. Is it raining out? Is it really hot and sunny on the lot? Is it dark because they're after hours? So all of these components come together into the time motion study to provide a score for us. And then that score is used along, a rating scale.
So it's kind of a quantitative, rooted, contextual inquiry type of approach.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
So a study that I sometimes wish FedEx and UPS people would do with their devices, when someone comes to your door and knocks, and then you gotta wait until they tap through 15 screens to get to the point that where you have to sign something. David, any other points?
I thought of two things. So I think the first point is there's going to be more use of ambient signaling and haptic feedback. I know my wife's Apple Watch, it taps on her skin to tell her to stand up, I think, and other stuff like that. And then the second point was that there's going to be more of a culture of surveillance and capturing user behaviors sort of without explicitly asking them and using that information
Drones.
Well, more just like, what do you do? Like, yeah, I mean, that too. Yeah. But I mean, like, you know, like how you're moving when you're using an app. Are you, you know, is there vibration? You know, all that information is going to go back to the mothership, whatever the mothership is, and influence the, you know, future deployment of products. And it's a concern to me because I'm kind of a paranoid privacy person, but you know, it's happening. Yeah. So, you know, and this is, it's slotting in with the culture of people because what I have heard from clients and, you know, in companies and feedback I've gotten from users is that, you know, the cliche about Apple, it just works, right? And more people are expecting those kinds of things. Like, you know, they don't want to waste time, you know, just doing a lot of task-based work. They just want what they want, and they want it now. And so, you know, user information is necessary in order to get that kind of a development.
So I haven't, you know, really worked in this space much, but I think those are great techniques that you guys are using from, you know, watching the users and everything. I think that probably applies to a lot of like the Internet of Things and a lot of the gesture-based things like Leap Motion and Connect. But I think from like the designing perspective, I think it's still important to remember that, you know, what makes something usable hasn't changed. It's still the same like design principles that govern, you know, what makes something usable or not. So I think, you know, just staying true to that, and then, you know, with different research and testing techniques combined, can make something better.
One of the challenges with testing things that are things like, you know, Fitbit or your Connect, right? I brought this up yesterday, so I apologize to the audience. But, you know, one of the problems with measuring things, like, for example, every single one of us in this room has experienced a very awkward Internet of Things design, which is the toilets, the automatic toilets, right? The automatic flushers. Yeah. They all work differently, and the reason they all work differently, partially, is because there's no way to test what's the appropriate amount of time before flushing. I mean, and I bring this up because it's real, it's physical, it's humanistic, it's challenging.
And it's irritating.
And it's irritating, and it's irritating for probably the people who design these because they're like, well, what do I do? I can't put a camera in there. I can't put a sensor inside the toilet and measure, right? I mean, so it's...
The Japanese do.
Okay. Do you want to share some more about that? I have, yeah, you can illuminate me
Look
on
up
that.
Japanese toilets on the internet, and you'll see some amazing, frightening things.
But I mean, so that's just a small example, though, of a larger issue as we continue to have to design for things without interfaces. So we're really going to have to take the time machine back to when computers first were becoming a consumer product, and think about things like digital watches that didn't have interfaces, calculators, you know, your toaster. I mean, think about that, you know, for a minute, like getting feedback about when the toast was done or whether you put it on the wrong setting. I mean, these are the kind of things we're going to have to start thinking about designing for, but they're also things we're going to have to measure for. So interestingly enough, you know, because we're moving into an age where we can basically fit electronics anywhere, you know, you can put a sensor on almost anything now yourself if you own an Arduino kit. This becomes more interesting because you could start measuring now. You could literally put a sensor on anything.
So I obviously a couple of you work for Turner. I think a couple of years ago there was a conference in which the senior director of a Cartoon Network was there, and he gave a very interesting answer to a similar question. And what he said was, they have designed a living lab. And what that is, so we have gone away. We talked about moving away from lab testing to now literally a living lab, which has multiple cameras that is observing people as they are interacting with a fake room. And they're observing how and when they use tablets, devices, how they are using the games, how they're watching the TV. And they design this whole experience of when you move from one device to another device. You know, from that, it came from that, and I was just wondering, I'm sure all three of you have worked with Turner or CNN. Did you guys hear about that, and have you guys were involved with that at all? No.
Yeah, I worked for Cartoon Web back in 2006, 2005, 2006. I never heard anything about that.
Okay.
So I guess we can speak a little bit about this, Rebecca.
Here, you want
You
a
used to be the VP of UX over at Turner. But so the lab is up in New York, and they built 2 environments that are in there. There's a shopping environment for magazines and basically how people browse. So the entire idea is that you monitor the entire space and you let people in there and they basically shop for magazines and they're intended to pick out what they do. And they interview them afterwards about how they make these shopping experiences so they can basically observe them. At the same time, they interview them afterwards. The living room is also built much like that, where you basically get access to a grouping of devices and then they let you in there to figure out what it is that you want to watch, how you want to watch it, how it works. And all this stuff works really well if you're a really large company that have a very focused sort of trajectory on what it is that you want to do. It was underutilized, in my humble opinion, because they charged a ton of money for being in there. So
that's you bring up a good point, which is cost, right? So, we started off with Agile, which is like, popcorn testing, practically free. I mean, and then, we talk about something as advanced and possibly as expensive as, living room testing in a formal lab setting. You do have to be careful and aware of the cost of these things. And my recommendation typically around research is, if it's a high-profile project, or if it has high risk that comes from, say, the C-level suite or some VP's idea, you want to spend money testing it. Because for 2 reasons. 1, you want to mitigate risk. But 2, if the idea proves out really well, you want this to work as a promotional item. So something we haven't talked about yet, which probably we shouldn't, but I will anyway, is that a lot of times usability, formal lab testing, video clips, and montages are used by corporate communications in order to promote and seed marketing with ways to sell the idea internally as well as externally. So it's really important to remember that when you're doing formal lab testing, to educate your communications people that a clip from a participant at a usability test is not something you can go public with. Okay?
Especially if they have signed a non-disclosure.
They all sign non-disclosures if you're smart. Right. And so what I'm saying is just be careful. But it is frequently in large companies, and as an independent consultant, this can get you in a lot of trouble quickly. They will try to use them for public facing. So be aware of that small piece if you're not into research. But yeah, it's very cost prohibitive to set up a lab like that. We have it easy at Mannheim because we have auctions all over the world, so we can set up a lane anytime we want. Everything is videotaped at our auctions, mainly because we want videotapes of the auctioneers in case there's any dispute about who won the car. So they, just like at a casino, we record everything. And the reason is for the customer's benefit. So they're happy as clams to be recorded. They don't have any problem with that at all. So don't go to an auction, David.
that is, and this is an aspect of sales, right? If we're talking about going out and selling this kind of service on your own and figuring out why should you do it, is using the analogy of an insurance policy. Because if software is about as expensive as it comes, right? You have highly costly resources that you have to put in chairs and commit for a long period of time to accomplish something. It just doesn't get much more expensive than that, right? High human capital investment. Basically, it's all time and materials that you're pouring into this thing. So the question is, if you have a project that costs $1 million, how much of an insurance policy would you put on it, right?
That's a valid point, right?
If you can I've used the argument of saying, you would probably pay 5% to get an insurance policy on your project that says it's going to come out successful. Or increase your possibility of successful account by X amount.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all about how much you're spending and how much closer you want to get to guaranteed success. Time, materials, all of these things. But you kind of get where I'm going.
Right. So yeah, I do, and that's an interesting gateway to. You use the word guarantee, right, and cost. Number one rule of life: never make any guarantees. But you guys have all dealt with clients, internal or external. In my experience, unrealistic expectations can kill a project faster than anything else. And unrealistic expectation can go both the ways, right? Either a client will think of user experience testing as the golden chalice that will solve everything, and when it does not in the very first try, they are disappointed. Or they will assume that it is not going to solve anything and will ignore anything, like David, to your example, testing. Just give me the damn wireframes. Yeah. So how do you educate? What do you have to do? Whether you're a shop of one or a billion-dollar company with a room set up, how do you do that?
I think you have to say that the research, whatever it is not going to give the information per se that will be the product. It's to inform the process of designing and building the product. Does that make sense? So like the research is not going to tell you what the product is. That's the wrong way to approach it. And I've had people throw this idea that, they've said Steve Jobs didn't believe in usability testing, and that's not true. Associated with that quote, he said he doesn't believe in asking people what the product is. He believes in developing the product that people want. That doesn't come from a focus group. Usability testing isn't a focus group. You're watching what people do, and that information is folded into the process. So that's an important point to distinguish, I think.
I think it's important to kind of define from the very beginning, the creative brief or whatever, just to work with your client to decide what are the measurable objectives, like what is our measure of success for your, what you want your user to accomplish, and kind of define that, and then agree upon that, and then that can probably drive what kind of techniques you're going to use. If there's more discovery that's going to be needed to be done, or user testing, in the Agile process, or after, kind of just deciding what those things would be and outline it at the beginning, so you can hopefully avoid any, disagreements about, outcome.
So my rule of thumb about educating is to begin with the value statement to whichever person you're educating. So if you're talking to a developer, you need to speak to them at their level. What is the value proposition of them spending time and money with me doing research? What is that value that they're going to get out of it? So the first is always the value statement for me, right? That's number one. Number two is understanding their objective, right? So to your point, Lauren, you really need to understand what their objective is, right? And sometimes the objective doesn't come from the person you're educating. Typically it'll come from the business, right? So you need to explain that typically testing is about mitigating risk, celebrating success, or allaying fear, right? Because the fear is around all of this. Testing is about mitigating risk and not being afraid that your decision is going to work in the marketplace. So I always think of those things when I'm pitching and educating to my boundary partners, because I have to sell my resource out to them, right, as a consultant. So that's kind of how we do it. I put a rate card together. I have a one-sheeter that goes out. So I was very careful about and thoughtful about designing the one sheet about all the different types of testing, all of those things. I think another way to educate is to present your research from past studies that may or may not be related to what you're doing, right? So show them, just show them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you can have the same vocabulary about what you're.
Well, and people love to feel like they can do it on their own. So, I'm happy to educate our development team to go out and do their own popcorn testing. Here's some techniques. Go out into the wild and go try those out. Tell me how it worked. Let's come back and talk about it. Because really, at the end of the day, we as UXers don't own research. We just happen to be best educated with the techniques to do it, but we certainly shouldn't hoard it. We should share it, right?
So we have about 10 minutes left. Unless there are any questions, I want to ask you a question. But I'm going to give you an opportunity to ask us a question. Yes, ma'am.
So it sounds like time and money are huge dictators that determine what kind of testing you can do and what techniques you can have.
But you guys have experience where you had free reign of what you do and you navigated, or you decided to do your favorite usability testing method, and that wasn't right for the project. You know, there was something that you were comfortable with, and it's your go-to because you're confident in it, but it didn't work for that client for one reason.
Yeah, there was a product we were trying to improve that had to do with patient admittance in hospitals. And my interest was going to see the users of the system and looking at what their problems were and kind of starting at the beginning. I wasn't aware that the project was in its death throes, basically, and the customer was so mad at us that they were ready to kick us out of the hospital. So I got into the contextual inquiry and then was laid off basically a couple of weeks into it because the project was completely canceled. So I needed to do more upfront, I guess, groundwork to understand that, you know, the trajectory of a contextual inquiry / ethnographic study is much longer than we have. We had to show the customer something immediately, and the thing was broken. It was actually the users were having to use the old system and our system, like every piece of information, because they didn't trust the new system. So it was in a dire state, and contextual inquiry was not the right method.
And those two are not an agile method, by the way.
So just recently, we were on a project that the wireframes were cut, and that because the client that was developing the website, and then we're providing design and UX, but because of the timeline that they shrunk, they just wanted like design red lines right away to go to development, and so sadly the wireframes were cut, which there's lots of questions now about what happens here. So in that kind of case, I think it's still important to do wireframes internally, if even if that is detrimental to your budget, it's still, I think, important to kind of get that in internally.
So failure is a big part of the business, and I'm embarrassed to say that my most recent failure, because I've had many in testing, was 2 weeks ago when we proposed to do an asynchronous card sort, which means that we were just going to put this on the internet, invite a couple of thousand people, see if we could get a 10% rate, right? You're laughing because you already know what the answer is going to be. To basically get prioritization as well as understanding of their channel preference as to how to receive notifications. Sounds super simple, sounds obvious, like Diane, card sort, that's so obvious. Well, the problem was that the number of notifications was a little high, in the 60 range, and what ended up happening was, in order for them to get their incentive, our participants just put everything in one bucket. For all of them. And so, this is a risk, right? Risk. Yeah, I'm happy to share the failure. But yeah, this is going to happen. So what we had to do, because we didn't get any results from the card sort, right, was we actually had to slip it into a formal lab test as an activity that we printed out this thing called the vehicle detail page, and we had them prioritize with a pen in order to do it. And so, sometimes you think your techniques are going to work, and this should have worked. I mean, by God, this is what they sell those tools for, right? Didn't work. So, sometimes you just have to roll with it and just try something new, especially if you need the answer.
How did you get them to, did you just do it after the fact, of standardizing the names, like, oh, they circled this and they called it this, but, you just lumped them all together as like this particular part?
No, literally, like this page,
Yeah.
I said, I will give you the instruction. David, what I'd like you to do is to circle the sections of the page and number them one through whatever in the priority in which you'd like them to be seen.
Gotcha.
That's it.
Gotcha.
That's exactly what we did. And we got exactly what we needed from that exercise that they could have given us in the card sort. We just had to pay more for it.
So I'm going to give you an example from both ends, and these are really not from a perspective of my own preference. It's well known that I'm not a big fan of lab testing. I'm simply because I think it's an archaic method that was developed in 1980s, does not really apply to digital space in an agile manner. We did a lab test for our e-commerce, our e-store, brought in 35. Now usually people bring in 7 to 8. We brought in 35 users and had them use the whole shopping cart and asked them to rate that. What do you think the rating was? 5 out of 5? They gave us an A+. The words were easy, super easy to use, wonderful, blah, blah, blah. We are confident, to your point, right? It is a method and process. We launch it, and our sales went, oops, sorry. What the hell happened? We just spent 3 weeks testing these 35 people. What the hell happened? What happens is halo effect. People come in, they will tell you, what do you want to know? What happens is they're playing with house money. Hey, you want me to use this? Yeah, I will use it. Not a problem. Who the hell cares? I don't lose anything. They did not ask the questions that other people would have asked. Hey, I don't understand what this information means. I need to understand this before I buy this from you. They don't care. On the reverse side of it, to the point of your Loop 11 or UserTesting.com, in unmonitored remote testing, the problem is when someone goes on a tangent, there is no bringing them back. They are just gone someplace else, and you're like, oh, mother of God, what the heck are you doing?
Well, I mean, I think with you, doesn't UserTesting.com give you the option to say no thanks? This one sucks for
No,
the.
You used to get the money back because you get a
Yeah.
trash user every 5
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, but again, it doesn't help you to be agile. That's the
Right,
problem.
right. Do you know about UserTesting.com? Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
So I mean, again, the point I'm trying to make with that story is every technique has its pluses and its minuses, and you have to figure out what the balance is. Yes.
If you had to redo that test where you were doing the shopping cart to make it give you reliable results, how might you do that?
What I mean?
If you had to redo the shopping cart test to get reliable results, how might you do that?
That's a great question. So the challenge with again is that what I actually would do it in the wild. If I can somehow recruit people, so there is a tool called ethnio.com, which allows you to basically recruit people online as they're using your website to say, hey, are you interested in conducting a test? And then you can observe them after that. You can use usertesting.com. Now, the problem with that is that you're interrupting someone's experience. How will they really behave once they know they're being observed? I don't know. So that's a great question. I don't think lab is going to ever solve that. Because again, you can always have a scenario.
I'm going to totally disagree with you here.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. So from a lab, we do a lot of lab testing at Mannheim, and I'm not necessarily like a huge proponent of it because I use a lot of different techniques. But the one thing about lab testing that is incredibly valuable is that you have intense, focused time to talk to that participant. So if you want to make formal lab testing work, you need to have a very skilled staff of researchers. You don't ask preference questions during formal lab testing. You don't. You may do it at the end as a standard usability assessment, but you don't ask them during, how do you feel about that, right? You don't ask them those questions because then they'll just talk your ear off. What you're looking for is focused questions around, say if you're testing interaction design, you're gonna back into it. You're not gonna ask them directly, but you'll back into it. So it's very complex. There's a whole industry of people that are trained and experienced at doing this to get you good results. The one thing you have to know going in is what are you trying to understand? The question is always, what are you trying to understand by doing a formal lab test? That's it. Terry?
I would just tack on to that your test is only going to result in good data if you have a good tester. So
Yes.
it's only as good as your tester. So if you have an inexperienced person, I would rather have an experienced person with a quasi-subjective test method than a tried and true test method with somebody who's never done it.
Well, the other thing is
if I may,
recruiting.
the people that we had testing this thing were PhDs with many years of experience. So the thing is that
So you were
the thing
already in
is,
trouble.
No, I'm going to counter all that because I get in trouble. I actually raised this part in NNG conference in Norman, and there was a lady who basically does this, and I said, your method sucks. So basically, then she comes back to me and says, well, you don't have experienced people. I said, well, what's your degree? She's a master's. Well, I have a bunch of PhDs doing this. Now tell me who does what. The point is not PhD versus masters. No. The point is what you're trying to ascertain in a triangle of usable and useful. The problem is, in a lab, you can understand usable. Am I able to click through and everything? But what is my intent for useful when I am making a purchase? What are those questions that I am looking to answer as I am making a purchase? How do I get to that? And that's a difficult thing to do, especially, for example, now we have subscription pricing versus license pricing, right? What questions will a human being have when they are looking at subscription pricing?
I think you can ask them to think aloud, right, and encourage them to do that, and relentlessly not let them just sit there in silence. And a lot of times you can tease out.
I mean,
As a note on this, though, you're testing probably the most difficult thing in any given web application, which is the shopping cart, the revenue generator, the thing that if you fill up, your head is gone.
Gone. Basically, the idea is
So I think the choice of technique also has to be chosen depending on what the target is,
Yeah.
right? So, I mean, the approach around shopping carts, and I don't do a lot of commercial, but would be A/B test your way through the cart as much as possible.
That's true.
As opposed to like
Quantitative.
big, gigantic, like cataclysmic changes.
So-
Because the risk is so large.
well, one of the good things about shopping carts in a B2C world is it is trackable. I mean, now, if you're a company that has a B2C cart and you're not using Adobe Analytics or something like that, you're crazy, because the current behavior is directional as to where the problems are. So you have to use quantitative metrics to really quickly and efficiently identify where carts are broken, right? I worked for Home Depot a couple years ago, and I spent a lot of time with their cart. Yeah. So let me just say this.
A lot of fun.
The best way to find out things about carts and shopping online, if you're doing it on the digital side, is to be using your analytics team and your BI team and go into Adobe yourself and find out those metrics, because we're tracking every step of the way if it's applied.
And don't let your product manager smoke crack and do things that don't make any sense, because I have seen that happen firsthand. Product gets a hold of those analytics and they do insane stuff like, change button colors because it gets 4 more conversions, and the UX goes down the toilet. So it's really good that they have a UX person looking at the analytics and analytics team and not just product.
Go ahead.
Cool. So my question, thinking about shopping carts, do you think that in a lab environment, people's expectations for the speed and performance of a shopping cart are different than in the wild? And how do you account for that?
Ooh, they will be. So in a lab setting, it's very likely that their speed will be different because of their location, right? Because you're basically testing it in one place, one physical place. So, although in terms of speed, you're not gambling or something like that, so speed to win is not a big deal for you. It's just speed to get out of the cart. So you'll experience some, but I don't know that it has a huge effect.
So if I may just let me respond, then I'll come back to you. Do you know the biggest thing is? We touched on it, intent.
Yes.
So Home Depot, when I worked for them and we were trying to optimize the shopping cart, the problem was, where is Home Depot? On every corner. So you own the website, are responsible for generating revenue. But if you as a user are only interested in knowing what the final price is and then going to the actual local store and buying it, there is nothing on this God's earth I can do to convert you. Nothing. So that's the biggest challenge. So that actually ends up happening. Most of the people end up researching, especially if you're a click and a brick, or even if you're a click or a call, because most people want to call. People are just looking for a final price. One tool that you can think about using is exit survey. Now it's also tough, because what happens when someone is exiting your website from a card, they might be pissed off, and the only one who's going to respond to you is going to be pissed off people. And when we did those surveys, the only answer was, I am still researching. And now next question I want to say, what the hell are you still looking for? Go ahead.
Just to tack on to that lab versus, I would say guerrilla or whatever. We were doing it a couple weeks ago at Starbucks in the West Side. We were walking around, And one thing, you know, I don't think we've ever gotten to that point, but the lab has something to offer, something that you cannot get in context, which is a camera on the thing.
Yes.
3 people watching, maybe 4.
A camera on the
Eyes
face.
on the face, camera on the face. I've even read articles about if you don't have a camera on the face, your whole test is worthless.
It is. Well,
arguable.
it's not worth it's not worth the cost if you don't have that.
Little things, you just can't pick up on this little like, oh, it's successful because I was watching the finger, the other guy wasn't watching that, and he was right. And so it just takes a lot of people to do a correct usability test, and they're expensive. So gorillas are fine. It's not one. It's not one thing.
No.
It's like you just choose whatever's best and do the best.
And that's the whole intent of the panel. You're right. And I'll give you an example of where this does work. My company has a conference of over 10,000 people, and I was in charge of testing our website on the floor. Now, I did 30 tests on that day. I'm walking around. You know what happened at the end of the day? I can remember jack anything. I had zero idea who said what, who did what.
So you didn't have a camera running on your shoulder while you were doing that?
And imagine, exactly, I was going to have a camera right here saying, loser, standing. But even if I had a camera there,
You'd have to run through hours of video.
You're in a place with 5,000 people. What are you going to hear?
Yeah, that's true.
So,
Can I add one thing?
Sure, go
I
ahead.
think it's interesting. There's a company here in town called Full Story. I don't know if you guys have looked at their stuff. I think there's a lot of interesting things that can come out of finding intent in these cards, right?
Yeah.
And so that's one of the, you have to pick all of these techniques that you guys have talked about, but Full Story is sort of a complement to that because it lets you actually watch what they're doing on the app. It tracks their mouse and their pauses, the whole thing as they go through the experiences. So kind of wrapping all that stuff together when
It's
you're
really
finding a
critical,
specific problem is really kind of an
there's another tool called Tea Leaf that does also it actually, I don't know if it does apps, but it tracks your mouse movement, your everything on the screen. It doesn't really track the eyes of the human being, but these are actual people on your website. Well, everyone, obviously this was a great conversation. We are 10 minutes over. Please give a warm round of applause to the esteemed panelists.